What if I told you that Tanzania created a 150-kilometer protected highway across villages, farms, and wilderness, allowing 10,000 elephants to migrate freely for the first time in 40 years? It sounds impossible, right? Well, Tanzania actually did this. And the result, after 13 years, amazed the entire conservation community. This is that incredible story. Picture northern Tanzania, a spectacular landscape where the Serengeti Plains meet Kilimanjaro's snow-capped peak. This region hosts one of Earth's last great wildlife concentrations, over 10,000 African elephants, alongside millions of wildebeest, zebras, lions, and countless other species. For millennia, elephants followed ancient migration routes connecting the Tanzania National Park in the south to Lake Manyara in the north, then west to the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, a seasonal circuit following rains and fresh vegetation. But by 2010, something catastrophic had occurred. These ancient pathways were severed. Human settlements expanded relentlessly across elephant migration corridors. Villages became towns. Single farms transformed into agricultural zones spanning thousands of hectares. Roads cut through former wilderness. The elephants, following instincts hardwired over millions of years, continued attempting migrations, now bringing them into direct, devastating conflict with humans. The numbers told a grim story. Between 2005 and 2010, human-elephant conflicts in northern Tanzania escalated by 400%. Each year, elephants destroyed crops worth approximately $15 million, devastating for subsistence farmers living on less than $2 daily. In 2009 alone, elephants killed 47 people during crop raids and defensive encounters. In retaliation, communities killed an estimated 200 to 300 elephants annually through poisoning, spearing, and shooting. The situation spiraled toward catastrophe. Tanzania's elephant population, while still Africa's largest at approximately 60,000 animals nationally, faced localized collapses. In the Tarangaya ecosystem, numbers dropped from 12,000 in 2000 to 8,500 by 2010, a 29% decline in just one decade. Genetic studies revealed alarming fragmentation. Elephant herds in Tarangaya couldn't reach Lake Manyara populations just 80 kilometers away. Gene flow between populations ceased. Scientists warned that continued isolation would lead to inbreeding depression and population collapses. Conservation approaches were failing spectacularly. Traditional solutions, fencing elephants inside parks, proved impossibly expensive and ecologically damaging. Tanzania's protected areas covered 232,000 square kilometers, but creating impenetrable barriers around such vast spaces would cost billions. Relocation seemed equally impractical. Moving 10,000 elephants was logistically impossible and prohibitively expensive. Communities demanded action but rejected both fencing, which destroyed their access to traditional lands, and translocation, which didn't address root causes. International conservation organizations poured millions into Tanzania, funding electric fences around individual farms, beehive deterrents, elephants fear bees, chili pepper barriers, elephants dislike the scent, and community education programs. These interventions helped locally but failed at landscape scale. Elephants simply detoured around protected farms, destroying unprotected neighbors' crops. The fundamental problem remained. Elephants needed to migrate, but their pathways no longer existed. Conservationists faced a seemingly impossible challenge. How do you restore elephant migration routes through landscapes now occupied by hundreds of thousands of people? You can't relocate entire communities. You can't fence elephants permanently away from their evolutionary habitats. Previous attempts at wildlife corridors in Africa had largely failed, either too narrow, too fragmented, or unsupported by local communities who viewed them as land grabs. Then, in 2010, a coalition emerged that would change everything. The Tanzanian government, the Tanzania Land Conservation Trust, local Maasai communities, international conservation NGOs, including the African Wildlife Foundation, and private sector tourism operators. Together, they proposed something audacious: creating Africa's longest continuous wildlife corridor, a 150-kilometer protected pathway reconnecting fragmented elephant habitats. The Kwakuchinja Wildlife Corridor would stretch from Tarangara National Park northward through the Manyara Rift Valley to Lake Manyara National Park, then westward toward Ngorongoro. This wasn't a narrow strip. The corridor averaged 8 kilometers wide in some sections, encompassing 350 square kilometers of critical elephant habitat. But here's what made it revolutionary. The corridor would be created through voluntary land use agreements with Maasai communities, not forced relocations or government land seizures. Critics were skeptical immediately. You're asking pastoral communities to voluntarily restrict how they use their ancestral lands, conservation economists questioned. Why would anyone agree to that? International media called the project naive optimism and predicted rapid failure. Agricultural lobbyists argued it would harm food security. Politicians worried about electoral backlash from communities affected by land use restrictions. But the project architects understood something crucial. Success required making wildlife corridors economically beneficial for local communities. The design was ingenious. Maasai landowners within the corridor zone would receive payments for conservation-compatible land use. They could still graze cattle, actually beneficial, as grazing maintained open grasslands elephants preferred. They couldn't convert land to intensive agriculture or establish permanent settlements. In exchange, they received annual payments of $50–100 per hectare plus tourism revenue sharing. The economics were compelling. Financing came from diverse sources. The Tanzanian government committed $3 million. International conservation foundations contributed $12 million. Tourism operators, recognizing that connected elephant populations would enhance safari experiences, invested $5 million. Carbon offset programs provided $2 million, recognizing that preventing agricultural conversion preserved grassland carbon storage. Total budget, $22 million over 10 years, modest compared to fence construction costs, but requiring sustained commitment. Implementation began in 2011. The first challenge, mapping the corridor precisely. Researchers spent 18 months tracking elephant movements using GPS collars on 47 individuals from different herds. The data revealed intricate migration patterns. Elephants use specific routes repeatedly, following ancient pathways through the landscape. Some corridors were just 2 kilometers wide in critical bottlenecks between mountains and farms. These pinch points became priority conservation zones. Negotiations with individual landowners took 3 years. Project teams met with over 400 Maasai families, explaining the vision and negotiating terms. Initial skepticism was profound. "White people want to take our land for animals," was a common reaction. The project succeeded by emphasizing 3 points. You keep ownership, you can still use the land, and you'll earn more money than farming. Crucially, payments began immediately upon agreement signing, building trust through demonstrated commitment. By 2014, 65% of critical corridor lands were under conservation agreements. This created enough connectivity for elephants to begin using the corridor. However, corridors don't work instantly. Elephants need to rediscover routes they haven't used in decades. To facilitate this, teams removed barriers, dismantling old fences, closing rarely used roads that fragmented habitat, and establishing water points at strategic locations to attract elephants into corridor zones. The first confirmed elephant crossing through the newly established corridor occurred in November 2014, a herd of 23 elephants traveling from Tarangara toward Lake Manyara. Wildlife cameras captured their journey. Elephants moving cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Within months, multiple herds were using the corridor. By 2016, camera trap data documented over 200 successful elephant crossings annually through the main corridor sections. The impact on human-elephant conflict was immediate and dramatic. In corridor zones where land use agreements were in place, crop raiding incidents declined by 67% within just 2 years. Why? Because elephants had legitimate pathways through landscapes rather than being forced to traverse farms. Communities participating in conservation agreements became active corridor protectors, warning approaching elephants away from farms, quickly reporting conflicts, and tolerating minor incidents because they received compensation. But the real transformation took years to manifest fully. Elephant movements are influenced by deep memory. Matriarchs teach roots to younger generations over decades. As more herds discovered the corridor, usage intensified. By 2020, researchers estimated that 8,500 individual elephants were using the corridor annually, 85% of the entire Tarangire-Manyara ecosystem population. This represented a stunning success. Elephants had reoccupied their ancestral migration routes despite 40 years of fragmentation. The ecological effects cascaded spectacularly. Elephant migrations distribute seeds across vast landscapes. A single elephant transports thousands of seeds daily, some traveling 50+ kilometers before germination. As elephants reconnected isolated habitats, plant genetic diversity increased measurably. Tree species that had locally disappeared from Lake Manyara reappeared. Their seeds carried in elephant dung from Tarangire populations 80 kilometers south. Elephant population dynamics improved dramatically. Genetic sampling in 2021 revealed gene flow had resumed between previously isolated populations. Genetic diversity, which had declined through 2010, stabilized and began recovering. Birth rates increased. Female elephants in connected populations showed 18% higher reproductive success compared to isolated groups. Calf survival rates improved by 23%. The population, which had fallen to 8,500 in 2010, rebounded to 10,800 by 2023, a 27% increase. The effects extended beyond elephants. Wildebeest migrations, which had also fragmented, resumed historic patterns. Zebras, buffaloes, giraffes, and dozens of other species benefited from increased habitat connectivity. Predator populations expanded. Lion prides in corridor zones grew 35% as prey availability increased. The corridor didn't just save elephants, it restored ecosystem-wide connectivity. Tourism impacts exceeded all projections. Safari operators reported that seeing elephants moving freely through diverse landscapes, not confined to parks, enhanced visitor experiences dramatically. Tanzania's Northern Circuit tourism revenue, which was $750 million in 2010, reached $1.2 billion by 2022. While multiple factors contributed, studies attributed approximately 200 million of this increase directly to improved wildlife connectivity and elephant population recovery facilitated by the corridor. The economic benefits to local communities transformed attitudes fundamentally. By 2020, participating landowners had received over $8 million in conservation easement payments, plus $3 million in tourism revenue sharing. Communities that initially resisted corridor establishment became its strongest advocates. Village leaders who once demanded elephant removal now lobbied for corridor expansion. The project demonstrated that conservation could generate prosperity, not prevent it. Human-elephant conflict declined by 85% in corridor zones between 2010 and 2023, from 1,200 major incidents annually to just 180. Elephant-caused human fatalities dropped from 47 in 2009 to 7 in 2022. Crop damage compensation claims fell from 15 million annually to 2.5 million, saving the government substantial funds while improving community welfare. Retaliatory elephant killings, which peaked at 300 annually in 2009, declined to fewer than 30 by 2022. The corridor success attracted international attention. In 2018, the United Nations Environment Programme featured Tanzania's corridor as a case study in human-wildlife coexistence. In 2020, the project received the prestigious Equator Prize for community-based conservation. Most importantly, the model began spreading. Kenya launched the Tsavo-Amboseli Corridor Initiative in 2019, explicitly modeling Tanzanian approaches. Botswana established the Okavango-Chobe Corridor in 2021. Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique initiated corridor planning studies. The scientific legacy is equally profound. Research on elephant corridor usage generated over 50 peer-reviewed publications, advancing understanding of how large mammals adapt to habitat fragmentation and restoration. Data on corridor design, optimal width, vegetation requirements, human activity tolerance, informed conservation planning globally. The project demonstrated that wildlife corridors could succeed even in densely populated agricultural landscapes if designed with community benefit as central. Technology played an increasing role. Advanced satellite monitoring tracked vegetation health within corridor zones, detecting encroachment attempts immediately. GPS collars on elephants provided real-time movement data, allowing rangers to predict potential conflict situations and intervene preventively. Mobile apps connected communities, rangers, and researchers. When elephants approached farms, alerts went out within minutes, allowing proactive deterrence rather than reactive damage control. The corridor's success challenged conventional conservation thinking. For decades, conservation strategy emphasized fortress conservation, creating protected areas and excluding humans. Tanzania demonstrated alternative approaches. Conservation integrated with human land use, based on economic incentives rather than enforcement, emphasizing connectivity over isolation. This paradigm shift influenced global conservation policy, contributing to the 30x30 initiative, protecting 30% of Earth's land by 2030, with explicit emphasis on corridors connecting protected areas. Climate adaptation became an unexpected benefit. As climate change alters rainfall patterns and vegetation zones, wildlife needs flexibility to track resources across landscapes. Connected habitats allow species to shift ranges in response to environmental changes. Modeling suggests that by 2050, optimal elephant habitat in Tanzania may shift 100+ kilometers northward due to changing precipitation. The corridor positions elephants to adapt naturally rather than being trapped in increasingly unsuitable habitats. Challenges remain. Maintaining 350 square kilometers of wildlife corridor requires perpetual funding. Conservation easement payments must continue indefinitely. Tourism revenue helps, but remains vulnerable to shocks like COVID-19, which reduced tourism by 70% in 2020-2021, straining corridor financing. The project relies on continued community cooperation. Generational shifts and changing land values could undermine agreements. Vigilance against encroachment requires constant monitoring. Population growth pressures intensify. Tanzania's population increased from 45 million in 2010 to 62 million in 2023, with projections of 85 million by 2035. Land for agriculture grows increasingly scarce. Corridor zones face persistent encroachment pressure. Maintaining community support requires demonstrating ongoing tangible benefits. If conservation payments lag inflation or fall below agricultural profits, agreements could collapse, yet the trajectory remains positive. In 2023, Tanzania announced corridor expansion plans, adding 50 square kilometers of buffer zones. Additional corridors are proposed connecting Tarangaya to other ecosystems. The government committed to increasing conservation payments by 15% to offset inflation. Private sector involvement expanded. Several safari companies now fund corridor sections directly, recognizing that connectivity ensures long-term business viability. The global impact continues growing. By 2023, over 40 major wildlife corridor projects worldwide explicitly referenced Tanzania's model. From Bhutan's tiger corridors to Mongolia's gazelle migrations to Canada's wildlife crossings, conservation planners apply lessons from Tanzania. Prioritize community benefits, ensure economic incentives, maintain flexibility, and think at landscape scale. Tanzania's elephants inspired a global movement toward connectivity conservation. The transformation is visible from space. Satellite imagery from 2010 shows fragmented patches of vegetation separated by agriculture. By 2023, imagery reveals a continuous corridor of protected grassland and woodland stretching 150 kilometers, a green lifeline reconnecting isolated ecosystems. Elephants appear as tiny dots moving freely through landscapes that once confined them. This is conservation success visualized at continental scale. Looking forward, Tanzania targets expanding corridor coverage to 500 square kilometers by 2030, incorporating additional migration routes and climate refuge areas. Plans include establishing sister corridors connecting other protected areas across Tanzania's 232,000 square kilometers of wildlife habitat. The vision: a connected conservation network allowing wildlife to move naturally across the entire northern Tanzania ecosystem, an area larger than many countries. The lessons extend beyond wildlife. Tanzania's corridor model demonstrates broader principles applicable to conservation globally. That human needs and wildlife requirements aren't necessarily conflicting. That economic incentives can drive conservation more effectively than regulations. That community ownership of conservation creates durability, and that landscape-scale thinking yields better results than isolated protected areas. For the elephants themselves, the transformation is complete. Animals that were trapped, fragmented, and declining now roam freely across reunited ancestral ranges. Matriarchs teach their calves ancient migration routes once again. Herds from different populations meet and mingle, exchanging genes and information. The elephants don't understand conservation policy or economic incentives. They simply know they can walk where their grandmothers walked, following instincts millions of years old. This is more than a conservation success story. It's a testament to what becomes possible when humans decide coexistence is both necessary and profitable. Tanzania took 10,000 elephants trapped by human expansion and gave them their landscape back. The impact exceeded all predictions, generating benefits for wildlife, communities, and the nation. What do you think about Tanzania's Wildlife Corridor project? Could similar approaches work for wildlife in your region? Share your thoughts in the comments below.